So today I wanted to talk about truffles in a warmer and drier future environment. And the presentation is entitled Towards a More Sustainable Truffle Sector in a Warmer and Drier Future. My name is Ulf Büntgen. I'm professor of environmental systems analysis at the Department of Geography at Cambridge University in the UK. I'm also affiliated since many years to the Swiss Federal Research Institute, WSL, as well as to the Czech Globe Research Center and the Masaryk University, both in Brno, Czech Republic. I think for today's talk, there are three items that are of highest importance, and I think throughout they will guide us like a red line throughout the entire talk. So first one is sustainability. Then it's climate change and global crisis. So as we are not only facing climate change issues, but also economic crisis, these will be addressed at the very end of the presentation as well. All this research I'm presenting today is not just my own work. These are data and methods, results, and discussion I'm elaborating together with many colleagues. They are listed here in alphabetical order. These are experts, I would say, in the wider field of truffle research from the Czech Republic, from Switzerland, from Germany, but also from the UK. And together we are working on various frontiers. The first example is from Spain. I call it the Spanish evidence. That's where we did most of our research, also field-based research associated with truffles and their environment in the past. Then the second example, I call it the Ecological Experiment. I will show you examples of how we try to improve our understanding of the ecological truffle web. And then we're going to try to expand this information that we are gaining in field surveys to a global dimension. So why are our results important? And they are obviously important for many parts of the world, not only in Europe. So three examples: the Spanish evidence, the ecological experiment, and the global dimension. Let's start with the Spanish evidence. We are well aware that different abiotic, so factors like climate, temperature, precipitation, but also snow cover, frost events, and greenhouse gases, nitrogen, and fertilization are affecting both the above ground and below ground fungal system, that they can have effects on mushroom production, both of mycorrhizal and saprotrophic mushrooms. We know that forest or host vegetation plays an important role to mitigate, to amplify, to buffer such abiotic effects for the mycorrhizal fungi. And although we know a lot, it still remains a very complex field of interdisciplinary research. There are more recent attempts to understand and disentangle the effect of the different factors, abiotic, climatic, environmental, human factors on the truffle system. And we know, for instance, that climate, both temperature and precipitation, that is prevailing the winter harvest of the black truffle, the Périgord black truffle, tuber melanosporum, that occurs in winter. So conditions like May to July precipitation totals before the harvest, or February to April temperature means, again, before the harvest, can have an effect on the productivity, on the formation, and on the maturation of truffle fruit bodies. This is highly complicated, again, because there is a mitigating role of host vegetation in between, and this is what we still have to understand. This is especially important because the plantations, this is an example from Teruel, are expanding. So there's more and more efforts, investments in such plantations, and irrigation matters. So the big questions are, how much water do we have to give in the system, and when do we have to give this water in the system? Are we watering the host trees, oaks, or are we watering the truffle system, the mycelium, directly? Is it important for a fruit body to receive water during the stage of formation or much earlier? All these questions matter. It is very complicated because the monitoring we are currently doing is very limited. And this is an issue of larger scales. This is an example here, as I told you just earlier, from Teruel. So you see a relatively new, very nice, big plantation. You see also the irrigation systems. The question again, when and how much water, in which fashion and way should be induced in the system. It is of larger importance. If you scale out, you see these plantations are covering quite a distance of land. Again, another perspective, another scale, big areas covered, and irrigation matters. You see up on the left, upper left part of the figure, there are two big artificial water bodies. They are needed to irrigate, so water competition is an issue and will increase if future climate will become warmer and drier. And we are talking about summer. So I'm showing now a couple of slides. Why are we talking about summer and how do we know that? It is summer climate that matters. So we have data from Spain on the A part of the figure, in the upper part, Spain, in the middle, France, on the right side, Italy. So we have in dashed red, dark red, a time series that is referring to the truffle, Périgord truffle, tuber melanosporum winter yield in each year from 1970, the beginning of the record, until present, 2018. So we see year-to-year fluctuations in the annual winter harvest of the Périgord truffle in averaged over Spain. There is a long-term decline, it's flattening out, and in the last couple of years, it increased a little bit and then stayed stable. And superimposed on this harvest yield record, averaged over Spain for the Périgord black truffle, we see again from Spain the summer precipitation totals averaged for June, July, and August. These are the blue lines, and you see both the year-to-year fluctuations are perfectly matching the winter harvest of the truffle, but also the long-term trend is nicely captured. And we see the same relationship in France and again the same relationship in Italy. So regional summer precipitation in averaged over the three areas, northeastern Spain, southern France, and more central Italy, corresponds highly significantly with the annual winter truffle harvest that is collected approximately 6 months after the summer rainfall. And down in the B part of the figure, you see, in comparison to the temporal relationship that was shown in the B part, you see the spatial correlation. So everywhere where we basically get dark red and red colors, that's where our truffle data explain high variance of summer precipitation. And the green dashed circles refer to the areas where the truffle harvests are coming from. I told you earlier, northeastern Spain, southern France, central Italy, north central Italy, and we have a very high coherency in terms of spatial agreement. Okay, let's go in the next slide. We are now averaging the annual winter harvest from Spain, France, and Italy. This is shown in the upper part. And again, we explain summer precipitation variability over the areas where the truffles are coming from. So this is a very robust relationship between summer precipitation and winter harvest. And if we are splitting it in B and C, B in an early part of the observational period, 1970 to the 80s or mid 80s, 90s, and then from the 1990s towards present, we see the relationship is even increasing. And this is counterintuitive. We would normally assume that the relationship between natural rainfall in summer and truffle harvest is declining. We would not expect that the natural rainfall in summer affects the production that strongly, because most of the melanosporum production is now coming from plantations that are irrigated. But we see this is not the case. So we are able, first result, to develop a model approximately at the end of August, September. We should know how good the winter harvest will be. So depending on the total rainfall amount between June and August that we can measure with instrumental measurements, we should be able, with a highly statistical confidence, to predict if it will be a good or a weak or low winter harvest. And you see here the actual harvest measurements in blue and the estimated ones based on our model predictions in red. Very high coherency. Key findings of this study, so that's why I call it the Spanish evidence. Black truffle production significantly depends on previous June to August precipitation. That's just what the data are telling us. That means the timing and dose of irrigation appears inappropriate to mitigate climate change effects. This is a harsh statement, but it is important because it means that the current irrigation systems that are in place can and should be improved. I don't say they are not good, but I say they can get better. And therefore, we have to understand the system better. So that means future directions should involve much more field work. This should be very innovative. So we have to think ahead. We shouldn't just do what we did all the time. We have to come up with new ideas. We therefore have to build new collaborations within and beyond academia and across disciplinary boundaries. So if we are continuing to do what we did in the past, we will not gain new insights. We have to be creative, we have to be innovative, and I think there are no constraints of doing that. An example, we started to do that, but we certainly have to do much more investigations in this direction, much more systematically. We have to understand what's going on below ground before the harvesting season. So I would propose to do these so-called eco-ecological investigations, excavations, looking into the soil at the same or at intervals throughout the entire calendar year. So all year around, we should make these diggings and see what's going on. Then we learn about fruit body formation and maturation far beyond of what the docs will tell us during December and March. This is important to understand growth patterns. How fast are truffles growing? When are they growing? When are they maturing? When are they ripening? When are spores developed and when not? Again, another question, who are the vectors? Are these insects? Are these animals? And I therefore suggest parallel studies, both within plantations, but also in the natural wildlife, to see differences in vectors. Who is transmitting spores? By knowing that, we get a much better understanding of natural dispersal ranges of the species. And last but not least, for the Spanish evidence, we obviously need to consider more and more systematically and continuously, including stable isotopes, the behavior of host trees. When are the trees growing? How are they growing? When are they allocating resources to the fungi? Vice versa. This is very important. This is basic research. And if we are reviewing the current existing literature about truffle growth, truffle maturation, we get enough hints and suggestions that we don't know a lot. So therefore, any kind of basic research, ecological research, is important. Okay, now to the next example, the ecological experiment. What are we doing currently? We are trying to understand how climate change will or is and will affect the truffle sector. We know that it will get warmer in the future, but these rates of warming are different. We know that the Mediterranean region will get much warmer relative or compared to Central Europe. That means the Mediterranean environments, including both natural and cultivated truffle areas, will get drier. They probably suffer more compared to potential habitats in Central Europe. That could mean that there will be a range shift. So the Mediterranean environments are getting unsuitable, whereas there might be new habitats that could also be at higher elevations that become more suitable. And we obviously have to see if there are shifts in species composition. So will Aestivum take over in certain areas where or will melanosporum take over in areas where Aestivum is now more favorable, vice versa? So the whole message from this exercise is that things are not stable. We have to monitor them, and we have to acknowledge that these systems, even if they are cultivated, they are not stable over many, many years. So we have to consider changes in fruit body production, quality and quantity from year to year and on the long term. So these are examples from Germany. This is what we call eco-archaeology. So we are using archaeological excavation techniques to look into the system. Where are truffles growing? How are they growing? What is their relationship to both root and fine root systems of host and non-host trees? What is competition between different fungal species, etc. So on A, you see that's how such an excavation plot could look. There are 3 levels, so it goes very, very slowly. Then you have the B part, you see, you dig in, you go deeper and deeper and deeper, go through the different soil horizons to understand where are the fruit bodies. This is important because dog-based harvests are most likely biased in whatever direction, but they are likely not representing the real world subterranean ecosystem. And here you see, for instance, how such an excavation plot for Aestivum in southern Germany would look like. You also see that's when we then find the truffle fruit bodies in situ. That's a unique chance to see how they are actually growing simultaneously. Although these are snapshots in time, they provide unique insights. Like up here, there is a very, very small fruit body a dog would never harvest. It's much smaller than 1 cent. It's certainly not at all developed, but then at the same time, in the same plot, we find under B, very, very overripe, already decaying fruit bodies. Or in C, we can see the tendency of growing upwards. So once a fruit body has been formed, it seems that these fruit bodies are not growing all directions in the same way, but there is a tendency that they are growing upwards. Such eco-archaeological excavations also provide information about the relationship of weight and maturity. So are these 2 processes co-occurring, or is a fruit body first growing and then ripening? We still don't know that. We don't know it between and within a species, so much more research is needed. This is important for us. And if we have these excavation plots, we can compare basically what is real within the subterranean world versus what is harvested by dogs. So we take reference sites where we only consider the harvest of fruit bodies that have been detected and indicated and detected by dogs versus all those that we are excavating at a certain period of time. And then last but not least, for such a story or study, we would also suggest to measure genetic kinship. So how many individuals do we have? How are they distributed in space and time? So what is actually the life cycle? And we believe that there are big changes or differences in life cycle dynamics between, for instance, melanosporum and aestivum. Another aspect that needs to be considered is the potential diversity of host plants. I'm not saying trees, I'm saying plants, because it seems that more and more plants that we actually think are potential host species. So this is an example from the Botanic Garden in Cambridge, which obviously, like all other botanical gardens, are hosting many plant species. In this botanical garden, there are truffles growing, so tuber aestivum, and we are going regularly to harvest them, to make observations of phenology and so on. So the idea is to get a much better and detailed understanding of the potential host species and how truffle fruit body production, that includes growth and maturation, ripening, is depending or associated with different host species and their phenology. So do we have an evergreen tree versus a deciduous tree that matters, and so on and so on. All this information is important. So you may ask, why are you doing all that? Why is that important? It is important because we have to increase, to enhance our understanding about the ecological requirements. They are species specific, but we need to know them. Obviously, we can make a literature review, but that is not bringing us further if previous studies were not comprehensive enough. So we need as much ecological and physiological understanding of how the different truffle species are growing, what's their life cycle characteristics, in order to develop ecological models. And then we can use a technique that is called ecological niche modeling. So we use this ecological information, the requirements, to develop envelopes in which truffles can grow. And these can be then used in an ecological model to predict, first of all, their current occurrence, and second, how this occurrence may or may not change under predicted climate change. So this is an example from the Czech Republic. We use the Czech Republic for several reasons. First of all, it is in the center of Central Europe, so it is most representative for Central Europe, natural environments north of the Alpine Arc for tuber aestivum, but also for tuber melanosporum. It covers a wide ecological range from lowlands to mountain systems, etc. And it is a country in which we have high resolution, spatiotemporally high resolution climate and soil data. So what we see here are the areas in which the Burgundy truffle, tuber aestivum, should be suitable according to the ecological requirements. So there are two areas, one in the northwest in Bohemia, and one in the southeast in South Moravia. This is indicated by the green color. This map is now shifted, it's smaller and shifted to the left upper part. And now we see in the other maps, using different climate scenarios for the future, for 2041 to 60, how these spatial distributions of tuber aestivum across the Czech Republic will change. So what we see that some areas from moderate will become more high or very high in suitability, but they get also smaller. So we see there are predicted changes in the future, and if it's getting too dry and it's getting too hot, the suitability range will actually get smaller for this species. This looks different if we repeat the same study for the Périgord black truffle, tuber melanosporum, and we see only very small parts of the Czech Republic, effectively in the most southeastern part in Moravia, are slightly suitable now. So there are these light green orange parts where one could see the Périgord truffle should theoretically already be able to grow. And now, interestingly, under projected climate change, these yet very low or low suitability classes will shift towards moderate and even high suitability. So there will be a net benefit for the Périgord truffle. If we summarize it, the Burgundy truffle is already highly suitable for cultivation on approximately 14% of agricultural land in the Czech Republic. Around 8% of the warmest part of southern Moravia, so just north of the Vienna Basin, are currently characterized by a low suitability for the Périgord truffle. Yes, we should be able to find some there already. But both Burgundy and Périgord truffles could become quite important high-value crops for many regions in Central Europe with alkaline soils. So this study shows that if we know a lot about the ecology and the physiology of different truffle species, we are able to feed this information in ecological models, in niche models, and then see how the species distribution range may or may not change under predicted climate change. Now let's expand our knowledge, our insights from the different case studies, from insights from Spain and evidence from Spain and from the Germany and from the Czech Republic towards a more global scale. So there are important truffle growing regions beyond Europe. In the Western US, California and Oregon, in South America, particularly in Chile, there are two regions where melanosporum is produced in South Africa, and there are different regions, two main regions in Australia, plus New Zealand. So we can look at the climate of these regions today, but also in the future. So the whole idea here is to see what are the climatic conditions of these different truffle growing regions at a global scale, and how will future climate change, so anthropogenic induced global warming, affect these truffle regions. And that's shown here. So the interesting thing is that the truffle growing regions were summarized here in the thick black line. How do they compare to the global? No, they are summarized in the thick red line, and how they compare to the global mean, so the rest of the world. And what we see is that for all truffle regions, on average, these will get warmer than the global mean under different scenarios, and precipitation is also assumed to decline. So the truffle regions will get warmer and drier, significantly warmer and significantly drier compared to the rest of the world by the end of this century. And not only are mean values changing, but also their range, so the extremes are becoming more extreme. And this is an important finding because under projected climate change, which will be stronger in the truffle producing regions compared to the rest of the world, these changes in mean temperature, so warmer temperature, and overall less precipitation will be associated or will be supplemented by more climatic extremes. So there will be more variability in the climate system. That means agricultural, like truffle systems, need to be adapted to a less stable and more variable climate. This is very difficult because in some years that would just mean your irrigation is too high, it's not needed, whereas in another year it's maybe not enough. So key findings: Périgord truffle growing regions will experience approximately 30% warmer summers with significantly more heat waves and around 10 times higher aridification until 2100. So it's getting drier. Soil is drying out. There will be an increase for water demand, irrigation demand, and water competition. Increasing summer precipitation over East and South Africa and parts of Australia and New Zealand will likely mitigate water shortage. So although we can see that all truffle regions will suffer, there are regional differences, and especially plantations and investments in South Africa and Australia and New Zealand are potentially less affected by future climate change. These findings are relevant for truffle farmers and businesses to adapt their irrigation systems and management strategies to warmer and drier environments that are coming together with more variability. I think that's a crucial point. The climate system will simply be more variable, which is unfortunate for any system that is in place. One could summarize that, but there are more factors. So this, one of the last slides I'm showing today, there are opportunities, but there are also challenges in a changing climate, in a changing world, in a changing environment. And these vary from local scales and short terms to global scales and long terms. So the truffle sector is highly complex. There are many opportunities I can see. So opportunities towards like increased biodiversity and conservation, certainly rural prosperity, reduced soil erosion, eco and microtourism, green agriculture, science policy interaction, that is highly important, and environmental and cultural education. We all see these things. Then there are things like carbon sequestration, interdisciplinary research, innovative gastronomy, sustainable landscape structure, reduced evapotranspiration, urban-rural exchange and knowledge transfer, human-dog interactions even. So all these things are opportunities. They are beneficial, depending on them, either more beneficial on local to larger scales, on shorter and longer time scales. But there are obviously also many, many challenges. And we as a community of farmers, business people, but also scientists should address these challenges jointly, like illegal harvesting and market manipulation, invasive species, ecological range shifts, that's what I talked a lot about today, price stability and market collapse, illegal trading, land use, land cover changes, limited ecophysiological understanding, complex life cycle and host interaction, thermally induced pathogens and diseases, irrigation and competition for water. All these things are changing. One take-home message is definitely don't consider the system to be stable. It will always vary and change, and we have to just to be aware of that. Today, the talk obviously focused on climate and environmental change issues, but giving a talk in 2021, it is impossible to neglect COVID restrictions. And this is just another crisis we are facing. I'm quite sure that none of us were prepared for that, but the truffle sector, the emerging global truffle sector, is affected by COVID restrictions quite dramatically. So the pandemic obviously affects restrictions on restaurants, gastronomy, the movement of people, and so on. That is shown in A. In B, we see that we have a loss of sociocultural events, indirect job loss, land property and value decline, direct job losses, truffle harvest and price reduction. So this is all ongoing stuff, and you are well aware of that. One reason why we can't see each other in person now, and I have to pre-record this presentation, is COVID. So this is a real thing. But in C, we also outline and believe there are benefits in the long term we're going to gain from that. And I want to summarize that here. The anthropogenic climate change has been defined as a main threat for the emerging truffle industry. Yes, that has been emphasized and highlighted in this talk, and also what I presented last year at Trufforum. Financial crisis and global pandemics, however, have not yet been considered in any of the sector's risks assessment. So last year at Trufforum, none of us were talking about the effects of COVID-19 on the truffle sector. Though the sector has been hit at an unprecedented rate, there will be ecological long-term advantages of the current harvest decline. So there is a harvest decline, but we should not panic. As I said earlier, the system needs to be considered as fluctuating variable. There will be beneficial effects if the harvests are reduced this year. COVID-19 forces small family business as well as international enterprises to reflect on its goals and the ways to achieve them. So this is something general. And I told you earlier, we really all have jointly to think about a more sustainable system industry. The current restrictions present a fresh, or therefore present a fresh opportunity to question extend cultivation practices, irrigation techniques, and trade systems in order to prepare for a more equitable and sustainable future of the truffle industry as a whole. So I thank you very much for your attention. We went through three main items: the Spanish evidence, the ecological experiment, and the global dimension. They are all interrelated, and I hope you enjoyed them. So thank you very much.